Hello, listeners. If you haven't liked, subscribed, or followed the Sounds of Living podcast accounts, you could find us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and Patreon at Sounds of Living Podcast. Any donation would be greatly appreciated to help support my journey of taking Sounds of Living around the United States. Thank you. Hello and welcome back to Sounds of Living. I'm your host today, Alex Kellerman, and I am sitting here with Rich Hopkins. Rich, say hello.
Hi, Alex. How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing well. Pretty good for almost losing my keys.
Oh, yeah. Rich, why don't you tell us about yourself? Who are you? Where'd you come from? Anything that you think the audience should know about you?
Well, I was born in 1958. My parents that adopted me were living in Houston, Texas. So I was born in Fort Worth, lived in Texas, moved around with my dad and his job for a while. And then we ended up here in Tucson in 1963 and grew up more or less in Tucson on the north side of there. And, who am I? Well, that's a big question, but I've been playing music since 1985, and that's been a great experience, taken me all over the world, had a lot of great experiences, generally speaking.
Why don't you tell us about your record store?
Okay, I opened up Hurricane Records about 7 years ago. My wife, Lisa Novak from Houston, we were living over there. I was from here, but I met her many years ago, and I decided to move over there to be with her. And she retired from her beauty salon job, and she owned a business there. And, it was right around that time where I thought, I need to do what I really want to do, which was open up this record store. And I always kind of kicked the can down the road thinking, I'll get to it. But it just kind of came to me like, this is what I want to do. So I looked online, found this building that was available here on 4th Avenue here in Tucson, bought it really quickly because it was a great deal and just got right to it. Here I am 7 years later, but this is just something I've always loved, record stores, and always wanted to do my own thing. So here I am.
Well, thanks, Rich. This is an awesome store, and I know that I've been coming here since I started school back in 2019 at U of A, and it's been a huge pivotal point for me to come in here and be able to look at all the albums and records and just see that it's still got that old school record store vibes. Not a lot of record stores have that same energy like they used to. A lot of them are changing with having more CDs and playing stuff from the computer instead of the actual albums. When you come in here, you get to listen to an album that's being played right off a record player. And that's just really cool. You can tell that you have a lot of music background coming into this store. It's very old school, but in the right way, in a very Tucson way.
Well, thank you. I understand what you're saying about record stores. I wanted something that was not big. So this is obviously a pretty small store, but I like the location. It's old, so we kind of work with what we have. My wife did a lot of the painting and set up this pseudo living room part, which kind of makes it look real homey and old, which I like old. We love old. We love preserving the past. Mm-hmm. I don't like new stuff. So it kind of works really well to be in the vinyl business, buying used records, making them presentable again if you can, reconditioning as best as you can to resell them again. There's something really neat about not wasting things,
I agree.
And we live in a world that, look, life comes and goes really fast sometimes. And this is just one way that we can kind of preserve the past, but sell it again, to people who are interested like yourself. And but I like the old. I really love the old. But I also like being very neat, as you can tell. It's got a certain cleanliness. And I do tell the guys that work here, cleanliness is next to godliness. And if you want to see me get upset is when this place is messy. I do like to present a nice place for people. I really do. Yeah. Because when people come in here, they really do kind of go down memory lane, but I want it to be easy to navigate.
Oh, for sure. And you can tell, when you come in, it's very comfortable. I think what has been awesome, too, is you've been able to kind of incorporate the new and the old, but still have that old style. Because, I've seen you have even newer artists that you're selling too. So it's really neat that you've been able to reach multiple audiences.
Yeah, I think each store in Tucson, like any place, has their own personality, okay?
Yeah.
This is, extension of my personality, things that I like. But at the same time, I remember 4 years ago, Taylor Swift came on my radar. You can't avoid her.
Yeah.
I said to the people one day, who likes Taylor Swift here? And everybody was like, boo, don't ever bring her stuff in here. We don't want her stuff. Or no, it was Billie Eilish, excuse me.
Oh, Billie Eilish.
And nobody wanted her stuff in here. But I thought about it, and I was like, you know what? We got to have her stuff. Because you know what? I want young people in here too.
Yeah.
But I'm going to expose them to my true values of music, so to speak, the things I like. But we got to have new stuff too. So we do have some rap. And you know what? To be honest with you, rap is the biggest selling thing we have. And I'm talking about one person in particular, Frank Ocean. People love Frank Ocean. What can I say? So we have to be realistic. That doesn't mean I'm going to play his records in the store. I'm just not into rap personally, but I don't want to sell anything that's offensive to people also. Saying degrading things about women, a lot of overt swear words. I really don't want that in this store. But even the 60s had its fair share of strong messages and words. That's just where I come from, and I'm just grateful that we can have a little bit of everything for everybody.
I think everybody is able to appreciate your perspective on things too, and it's nice that you're able to see both sides of the coin.
Well, again, we are in a university area and there's a lot of diversity down here. And so you have to be realistic. And I really do want people that are young, including yourself and other people. I'm proud of the fact that some of the Latin stuff that I sell is very hard to find. I usually buy that stuff in Texas. And look, every once in a while you get people in here looking for things and they really appreciate that I have some of the harder to find records from the 50s or 60s. But I get some of that stuff in Texas because Texas is a big state and they have a lot of diversity culturally. So I can buy a lot of blues, Latin stuff, just like I can here, but it's a bigger market over there. I buy from wherever I can. I want to reach as many. I want to have something for everybody.
Why don't we get into your pivotal points where music has made you who you are?
Okay.
For the first point, you said that you were a part of a 6th grade rock band. Can you tell me more about that?
Well, yeah, I grew up here in Tucson and went to a little school. It was like nursery school, or maybe it was 1st grade through 9th. It was out on the east side called Tree Haven. Anyway, there was a counselor there. His brother, his name was Mark Spear. His brother played in a local rock band. This must have been in 1969 or 70. I'm having a hard time remembering exactly what year. But he wanted to put a little school project together, a little rock band that would eventually play at an intermission of a school dance or the next talent show at our school. He knew I loved music, so he said, why don't you sing? And I was like, huh? It just was so like foreign, the whole idea that I would ever even do something like that, especially in 6th grade. But he put this little group together and we ended up playing at a school dance. The band from Tucson took in a break and it's like, okay, boys and girls, jump up there real quick and play I'm Not Your Stepping Stone by the Monkees, which we had rehearsed. I was so scared. I mean, we were now playing in front of all my peers from the little school dance, So we got up there and when the song started, we picked up their instruments and just played. And it just was such a wave of power that I never had experienced in my life and never really did ever again. It's sort of like if you're getting high. First time you get high, you really do feel it in a way you never did it. Excuse me for talking about something like that. But your first experience, it's like your first love. Okay, it was such a wave of power that I experienced, and it scared me in a way. I was very shy. I had my back to the audience most of the time, I'm sure. But it's something I never forgot. And obviously, it was so powerful, I came back to it eventually. But it was a really neat experience, and I never forgot it. So I'm very grateful that that counselor got us to do that.
I know that you said that you had played a Monkees song. Were there other artists that kind of inspired you to go out and face your fear of performing in front of people?
Again, I grew up in the 60s as a kid, so I listened to a lot of AM radio here in Tucson, which was KTKT and KIKX. Those were the two AM radio stations. And they played music of the time. It was so varied. I mean, it played garage music, soul music, Otis Redding. It played Mamas and the Papas, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, every one-hit wonder of the time. And there were so many in the 60s. They just had one hit, but they made it to AM radio. So I grew up listening to all that stuff. Then it got a little heavier with the Doors, Deep Purple. I could just go on and on and on of how many bands there were that just kind of blew our minds at the time. And I was very naive. I was just a kid listening to the radio. It was powerful. So I know I've kind of gone off topic here a little bit, but when I started playing music eventually, it was so easy to go back into my record collection and think about some of the covers I wanted to start playing. When we started, we didn't just write every song like right off the top of our head. We were doing covers of the bands we liked.
Oh, that's very inspirational, and especially because that time of music before the 60s, there weren't as many genres out there, and it just kind of like instantaneously changed the whole music industry, and like everything that was coming out was being a hit, and it was challenging our ways of thinking. It does make sense on how you were inspired by them.
The interesting thing is that, again, rock and roll kind of came out of the 50s, right? You have your Little Richard, Chuck Berry, and then the Beatles and the Stones. All these English bands were mimicking the blues guys. It was kind of interesting. I didn't understand what blues was as a white boy growing up here in Tucson. But I listened to the radio and I loved soul music. A lot of soul music, like we had Otis Redding. We had so many great bands, the Temptations, the Supremes. It was just on AM radio. But it was all intermixed with the Beatles, the Stones. Everything was just mixed in. So I didn't really understand the genre stuff. It was just one big thing that radio was presenting to everybody.
It's so different than how things are now, especially with like the streaming, and people aren't really listening to the radio anymore. It is interesting to think about how that was like the place where everybody would listen to music, and they threw in all these various artists. It's just insane.
It is very interesting to think back about how life was different back then. I don't listen to the radio anymore if I can avoid it. There's so many other things I would rather listen to, of course, here, working here. But as a kid, that's all we had. I mean, maybe it's not that different now than it used to be, because we listened to the radio because we didn't have anything else. It was a little cheap radio. And then when I was lucky, I had a little cheap record player, and I'd get my first few records from my mom, that she would be kind enough to go out and buy me a record of something I wanted to have. And then we started sharing records as a kid, But
of course, yeah.
Yeah, maybe it wasn't that different, but it was just what I went through.
And to jump into your second pivotal point, at least 10 years, 11 years after you had done the rock band in 6th grade, you joined the Peace Corps and you went to Paraguay. Tell me about that.
When I was in college, I was around a lot of great musicians, and this is in upstate New York. I went to a place called Ithaca College, and there I met my friend, one of my best friends, Chiele Minucci, who was this really incredible guitar player. And I ended up being like, I wouldn't say best, well, we were almost like kind of best friends. He was kind of like a miniature Carlos Santana. He played a lot of jazz fusion of the time. So this is in 76 to 80, okay? So there was the punk rock thing that was starting to happen, coming out of the rock, punk rock, and then you have a lot of jazz fusion. Ithaca College was a music school also. Anyway, Chiele, great guitar player. We all knew he'd end up doing something. But I was kind of like intimidated being around people like him, because I was like, man, I don't really want to play guitar because this guy's light years ahead of me. And I was kind of comparing myself, which wasn't really right to do. But in a sense, watching him all the time gave me, it fueled that fire that, hey, maybe I do want to try to do this someday. So getting out of college, I graduated in 80. I joined the Peace Corps, which was something I had been thinking about during college. I had a degree in anthropology, so I love reading about culture, and I always wanted to go to Latin America. I'd been to Mexico a few times, but my mother was a historian, and I had that little bit of knowledge about Latin America, and I wanted to explore that. And I really wasn't ready to settle down.
Yeah.
So I joined the Peace Corps, went to Paraguay, South America, and it was during that time that I had a lot of time on my hands. I was sent out to the countryside to work out there, and I brought my guitar. I had a little guitar, and I started just playing every night. And I started writing my own music and playing with a couple people there. And that time away from America, where I just had a lot of time on my hands every night to either read. There was no running water, no electricity. We lived by candlelight, okay? You know, when the sun went down, it was like you read by candlelight, played your guitar, hung out with some friends maybe for an hour, and then you went back to your little hut where I lived. I guess what I'm saying is that I just immersed myself into music. And I just got the bug, and I just started writing more, playing more with people, and it just started growing. After I left the Peace Corps, and I started doing my own recordings down there. I had a ghetto blaster, and I recorded everything I did. So I just had this love for recording. And I knew I wasn't that good, okay? I knew that, but so what? I guess it just didn't matter. I just did it. I had no dreams of coming back here and being a rock star. That was the last thing on my mind. But when I got back here, I kind of put all those things away and thought I'd better get back to reality. I came back here and I got some jobs working at Walgreens, daycare, whatever, anything to put some food on the table at that time. And I also went back to school at the U of A and thought I'd get a master's degree in agronomy. But it was during that time where I got involved in music again. But it wasn't something I really thought I'd do while I was in the Peace Corps. This is just an isolated thing. I'll never do it when I get back to the U.S.
I know that you had written music while you were there, but were there experiences that you were having in the Peace Corps that you would write about?
Music to me was very personal and sacred. Like, I would write a lot of instrumental stuff. There were two people I played with primarily. One was a really good friend of mine who joined the Peace Corps at the same time as I did. We were in the first group together. It was called Vieta 1, which Vieta was a little town where we went to for 3 months and trained to be agricultural extension agents. So those first 3 months, Bruce and I, his name was Bruce Larkin, he played flute and I played guitar, and we just kind of wrote our own little instrumental songs because he could play melody and I could just come up with these chord changes. But it was all just sort of like really kind of precious, and it was kind of like easy listening. We weren't playing rock and roll, but it was our own music. Paraguayans know a lot about music because they know polka music. And polka music is their dance music. So a lot of people knew how to play polkas. I didn't like polkas at all. I was like, this stuff, I just don't get it. But I met a guy in my site, in my little village, who was very intelligent. He knew how to play music and different kinds of music. And he was a guitar player and a singer. So we became really close. He taught me a lot of stuff, and we had our own little group. So I had two groups in the Peace Corps. One was called Sapo, which was me and Bruce, my Peace Corps friend, and I, Sapo, which means frog. And then I had a little group with my friend, Concepcion Romero, and that group was called Los Reyes, the Kings. I thought we were the Kings. It was an odd little thing. It was a duo, and we just recorded everything we wrote, and he played a lot of guitar melody, and I would come up with the rhythm, and I started playing some little lead guitar on my acoustic, and we just recorded everything. And I got so excited, we started going to a little recording studio in Asuncion, which is the capital of Paraguay, and it was like, roll the tape, and let's knock this thing out as fast as we can. That was the beginning of my passion for recording and writing and playing with people.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's insane.
But I never thought I'd do it when I got back to the U.S. I thought, time to grow up, like my dad would always say, grow up, get a job, and put this childish stuff aside. And I tried it, but I couldn't do it.
You couldn't. The music was too strong, and it was pulling you into the direction that you were supposed to go in.
Yeah, basically.
So the artists that were influencing you at the time, who were they?
Again, when it came to writing my own music, it was really like whatever came to me. I mean, I could say Chiele Minucci, but he was doing, like Al Di Meola, Carlos Santana. So I wasn't playing jazz because I could barely put 3 chords together.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really like that. It was very basic stuff. But again, I started thinking what comes out of me was the stuff I heard as a kid. Very simple rock stuff. So I could say it was the Monkees, the Blues Magoos, all these cool bands from the 60s. Even the Beatles, they were writing complex stuff. They were great musicians. I started listening to friends of mine here in Tucson who were playing in garage bands, and they were really good. In 1979, they were a garage band playing covers. They were called the Pedestrians from Tucson, and they were good friends of mine who grew up in the same neighborhood where I grew up with my dad and mom. And Dave Seeger, Billy Settlemeyer, Chris Kakavas, they played in this little group, and they were fantastic, and I was in awe of them. Tucson had its own little punk rock scene, and there was a band called the Surfers, which became Green on Red. They went out to LA in 1980 and got themselves a record deal, learned how to do it. See, you got to figure out how to become something.
Like, you have to figure out what your sound is.
Yeah, you have to figure out your sound, and you have to be dedicated to making it. And Green on Red did that in LA. They met the right people at the right time, and they developed themselves, and they got their record deals. The Pedestrians morphed into Green on Red. The Pedestrians morphed into a band called the Giant Sandworms, which then morphed into Giant Sand and Naked Praise. When they broke up, they all started their own bands. And those were my Tucson heroes.
Yeah.
And I was like, if they can do it, I want to do it too.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
This leads into your third point, and that's starting your own band. The Sidewinders, and then Rich Hopkins and the Luminatios.
Okay, so how did I actually do it? Because I told you when I got back here, that was the last thing on my mind. I was pretty confused. And then I met this girl. Her name was Andrea Curtis. She was a local musician playing in a really cool band from Tucson. I got sidetracked and we ended up getting married. We were all very young, but it was an exciting time. But again, I didn't think I was going to play music. I mean, there was all of a sudden reality to deal with. But Andrea was starting to play with some people. And I was like, well, that's cool, right? Well, one day she said, hey, do you want to come jam with me and some of these guys I'm jamming with because we need a guitar player? And I'm like, well, I don't have an amplifier. I don't have an electric guitar. I was just still plunking around on my acoustic. But I went to my friend Dave Seeger and I said, Dave, who was in Naked Prey at the time, I said, Dave, could I borrow your amp and guitar? And he said, sure. So I went down there and started jamming with these people. It was here in downtown Tucson. It was in 1984. It was like Andrea on drums, this guy Roger, who was really into like a band called New Order at the time, and then this guy named Randy Ferber who was playing bass. And for whatever reason, they didn't have a guitar player, so I come in there and I just started playing chord progressions that I knew. And we all kind of just started doing that for a month or two. I just kind of became a natural leader. Like, these guys aren't writing songs. And I really don't know how to play New Order, and I don't want to do New Order. I want to be like Green on Red. I want to be like the Naked Prey. I want to be like Neil Young, okay? Because that's what I could do, okay? Just kind of like strum guitar stuff. Anyway, we were called the 700 Club. And one by one, they all quit, including my wife.
Whoa.
And then we kind of went through a separation and then divorce, okay? Roger was the last guy to quit. So as they quit, I was like, I'm going to replace these people. I'm going to go on.
Yeah.
And I found a drummer. I found a new bass player. But I have no confidence in playing lead guitar. Remember? I was still playing rhythm. So I found a lead guitar player. We went to this guy's house. His name was David Slutz. And he had a little 4-track recording studio here in Tucson. I met him at a party, and he said, sure, come on over. I'll record you. So we had one song, and we laid it down, bass, drums, and guitar. The singer at the time was a bartender here in town, a graphic artist. Remember, he was into The Cure, he was into the English stuff, but we weren't really doing that. And he was losing interest really quickly in what we were doing, because now all of a sudden I was taking charge. Long story short, we recorded the basic tracks on this 4-track thing, and we just left it there. And the singer never finished the song. He never came back to sing. And so Dave Slutz, the guy that owned the little 4-track, said, I really like this. I'm going to put my own lyrics and my own melody on Rich's thing and see what he says. So I came over one day and I said, Dave, could I listen to what we did 2 weeks ago? And he goes, yeah, I hope you like what I did, because I put my own vocals down on your music. And I was like, okay, sure, play it. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, this is great, Dave. This is fantastic, Dave. And by that time, Roger, the singer that I had been playing with, he quit. And I was like, Dave, do you want to play in our band? We're the Sidewinders. I came up with that word, right? It was so Southwestern. And I know it's a long story, but it was very pivotal at the time. And Dave goes, oh, yeah, sure. And so we had a gig. I had already booked our first gig, opening up for Naked Prey downtown. And we had about 3 weeks to put together 8 songs. So Dave, all of a sudden, is my new partner in songwriting. Remember my wife I was telling you about, Andrea? Mm-hmm. She had quit the band. She wanted to come back all of a sudden and sing. And it was like, well, I got Dave Slutz now. She goes, yeah, but I want to sing too. So we had 2 lead singers. Oh my God. Male and female. We kind of went through some crazy times together. And this is back then when we were all screwed up. Okay, we did a lot of drinking and a lot of drugs, and I'm just not saying how good or bad it was, but we were just kind of trying to figure it all out. Now, Andrea had some credibility because she'd been playing in a really cool band in Tucson for a couple years. People knew who she was. So it was like, of course, she had the most credibility. The rest of us were kind of like newbies here in Tucson. So we played our first gig, and off went the Sidewinders in 1985. So that's the beginning of that. But we went through so many changes in the next 2 years. People came and went and came and went. And actually, when they quit, I replaced them. I replaced every single one. We started off really hot in a small way. We just weren't that good. It took literally 2 years for Dave and I to figure out how to really write good songs and get confident, because I had very little confidence. That's why I kept on getting the lead guitar player, and I was still the shoegazing rhythm guitar player. But after a while, it's like, listen, let's get rid of these lead guitar players. Everybody wants to be a lead guitar player. And I just started doing it. I bought a distortion pedal, and off I went, and I figured it out. And my confidence grew, and then Dave and I started writing songs. And Andrea and I, by that time, she quit the band. We separated. We divorced. She came back to the band and wanted to play drums. I mean, it was just this crazy thing for a long time. But then the Sidewinders started figuring out how to write songs, and we started building a really good following here in Tucson starting in '87, and the band started really catching hold. Before you knew it, we were making our first new album that came out in 1988, January of '88, and by then we had risen to the top of the food chain here in Tucson.
Wow. And you guys have been together ever since?
No.
No.
We had 88 was our first album. And it's a very exciting story because I had ambition. Listen, whenever somebody quit, I replaced them. It was like, what's next? What's next? What's next? And it's like I was looking at what some of these other bands were doing. What did Green on Red do? Well, they went to LA. They met this person. They tried to get on that label. They tried to get on that label. Well, I started doing the same. We started shopping our music. I wasn't content with being a big fish in Tucson. I wanted to be on a record label. And that's what happened. I wasn't content with one little independent record deal. We put out our own record, okay? But then it was like, well, what are other people doing? No, they're getting other independent record deals in LA, the East Coast, New York. And that's what we strive to do. And we did it. We went out there and got a deal with this record label in North Carolina that was just starting called Mammoth Records. And we were already recording our second record on our own called Witch Doctor. And so we signed a deal with Mammoth. I mean, we started going everywhere. I mean, we would just drive out to Texas. We'd play 2 gigs, come home. We'd go to LA, play 1 gig, come home. We met these people. They said, you need to tour more. People need to see you. We did everything that was being asked. And literally, it was just like one stepping stone to the next, to the next, to the next. Dave and I, as songwriters, just started really gelling and figuring it out.
Wow.
And the band got good. And we just had this really great energy. 5 solid years of record deals and touring and living the life. But then what happened was we broke up in about the summer of 93, and we had a major label record deal. But so many things had changed. The Sidewinders had gotten sued because there was another band called Sidewinder in North Carolina. It's a long story, but we had to change our name to the Sand Rubies. We were still on RCA Records. We got off the label and we went to another label, and then there was downtime, and are we going to get back on a label? We don't know. And then we got back on finally, but by that time we lost some of our momentum. You know, music, a lot of energy goes into this stuff, but when you lose your momentum and you're asked to sit on the sidelines for a year and hopefully you'll get another record deal, the manager's saying, and we had management, don't play, just sit still. Well, you know what? That's not who I am. So in the meantime, we kept playing. I started another band called Rich Hopkins and the Luminarios because I couldn't sit still. And I just was thinking, wow, what if this doesn't work out? Well, you know what? After a while, it didn't work out. So the band broke up in 93, the Sand Rubies, a.k.a. the Sidewinders, right? There was some bad blood between Dave and I, admittedly. We fought a lot. Dave and I were like a married couple. And, you know, I wasn't very mature. I was very controlling. I was really angry that things weren't working out the way I wanted it. I wanted to keep it the Sidewinders. I wanted it this little thing. But it got out of my control with the management, and Dave kind of started drifting emotionally too. We took about 3 years off, did some other stuff. I did my thing, Dave did his thing, and then we came back and started playing again. We've done a lot since then, but we never recaptured the glory of the big record deals. I figured out how to get independent record deals. I did that every day. I've been still doing it. I know how to do that. There's a lot of indie deals. You can build something, but you're never going to get like that major label push again. It's hard, you know? Have you ever heard this saying, when your ship comes in, get on it, because it may not ever come back?
No, I haven't heard that.
Well, my dad told me that. And what that means is when you get a big opportunity from a sizable company for you to go work at, you better think about it and maybe get on it, because you may not get the same opportunity again. When those major label record deals went away after we broke up because we were all angry and such, it never happened again. It's all about energy and perception. I know I talked a lot, but there's a lot to be said about what we went through.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you had a whole 2 bands, multiple members leaving and going. And
Ego. Dave and I, really good friends now. Pretty good. I mean, I respect him. He's my first partner, big partner, okay? I was jealous of the attention he got as the lead singer. And yet here I was, push, push, push. Let's get this job done. I was the guy that was making it happen. But he was the golden boy with the voice. And everybody loves their lead singer, okay? This is just reality. Do you see what I'm saying? I wasn't mature enough to go, this is the way the business is, Rich. You know what? You're going to have to take a back seat on this and allow Dave to be Dave. He had his issues too.
Yeah.
But I had mine. I can only talk about mine.
Of course. And when you did do your own band with the Luminarios, did you sing on that, or did you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't have a lot of confidence when I first started music. So when it came to singing, after having Dave, it was like, whoa, this is a lot harder than I thought it was. But I just forced myself to do it, you know? Here's my attitude. I'm going to do it all myself. I'm not going to depend on another partner to make this happen. I can't count on other people anymore. So in a sense, my control issues kind of took over, okay? But it forced me to work a little harder in some ways. Dave and I, when we were doing the Sidewinders, I wrote the music, Dave wrote the lyrics, and he wrote his melody, and we would just put it together. But I thought I could just do as good as what Dave was doing. It wasn't the same. I had to learn how to write my own music from my own heart, And that has been an ongoing endeavor for the last 30 years. But I wasn't going to be able to replicate the same success that the Sidewinders had. But I was able to go out and get some record deals. And I've stayed with the same record label in Europe, in Germany, called Blue Rose Records for the last 27 years. And they've put out all my records. And I've done a lot of touring in Europe. The difference was the Sidewinders, we were on MTV. We had airplay here in the United States on big FM radio.
So you had more commercial
We
success.
did big tours. We had publishing deals. I never got that again. It was going to be like you're at the bottom starting again. Being in an independent thing, I just couldn't get that same, like you said, commercial thing happening again.
Those are all fantastic stories, and it's just so interesting to learn about your experiences and how you've become the artist you are, and I appreciate you sitting down and taking the time to talk to me and the audience about your experiences with both the bands that you were a part of and how you got there. But before we go,
yes, I
would like to ask you if there's anything that you want to say to the audience that you believe is important for them to know about you, just about life in general.
Yes,
what would it be?
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
Well, one is, I have a lot to say, to be honest with you. But what really matters to who I am now, or what I've been through that makes me who I am today, I made a lot of mistakes, all in the name of what I wanted, okay? Yes, there has been some success too. I'm not going to deny that either. But what matters most is, and I think I mentioned this to you at one point, is having a spiritual life that you can always fall back on when times get tough. Instead of, where's the next place I'm going? What's the next tour? When am I going to drink again? I experienced some really tough times as well because my ego got out of control. And I learned to medicate in a lot of unhealthy ways, okay? So I'm grateful that I have a relationship with God, which I really feel like in this world that we live in, I know there's a lot of division, and I could say I believe in Jesus, who I do believe in, okay? I do believe in God. I know a lot of people don't, but all I know is that when times get tough, how does one truly deal with their pain, I don't know. All I can say is I'm grateful for the hard times because they brought me to my knees, okay? And I knew I needed help. I knew I couldn't keep up this facade of, Rich Hopkins. Again, I talk about ego, but it really was taking me down. All I know is that I'm in a much better place now that I learned about failure and I admitted it. And I needed to say I was sorry to the people that I wasn't very nice to. I made a lot of mistakes. But that's growing up. And you either learn these things young, if you have parents that are willing to teach you. My parents, God bless them, but they had a lot of drinking problems. They did the best they could for me, but their answer to my life was, well, let the schools deal with you, let other people. But what I'm saying is that I didn't have that base of spirituality of God and knowing what's right and wrong. And so I took advantage of that. It's little bit by little bit by little bit. So what do I want to say is that I think having a spiritual life and having a relationship with God is the most important thing. I'm grateful for all the other things, but what happens next after this life? This is all great, catching our, making our dream come true. But what's going on inside of us, Because there's a lot of anger in this world. Just for instance, you talk about the Iran-Israel-Palestine situation. My gosh, there's one more thing to be angry and divisive about. You know what I mean? It just keeps going and going and going. So all I can do is go, I can get caught up in that too. But I'm just learning to pray and let go of all the ways to medicate except for God. That's the most important thing for me.
Well, thank you, Rich, for telling us your perspective and your relationship with God and how it's helped you become who you are now.
And I'm grateful for my wife, too, because, my God, I didn't know anything about relationship stuff. I thought I did, but I didn't. And so I met a really good woman, Lisa, my partner, who plays in the Luminarios, and we're songwriters together. And, all I can say is that learning to do relationship takes work. And I kept on thinking, well, if we're in love, it's great, that's enough. But times are going to always get hard for everybody. But how do you navigate those hard times? I didn't have those skills when I was younger. I knew how to do Rich Hopkins. But to what degree is being the solo guy, that's not really super inclusive. So I guess all I'm trying to say is I'm really grateful for where I'm at today. Relationships do take work. And going back to Dave Slutz, for instance, my partner, I wanted to say I was sorry for some of my behaviors because I could be a real jerk. And if we can't admit that we were wrong, then that's a problem.
It's true. Accountability is very important in order to move past things.
Yes, we have to admit it. And that's why having a relationship with God is important, because God does want us to be, I think, quote unquote, happy. But that relationship has got to be with God first and then everybody else second. And God does want to hear when we make mistakes, of course. God loves us. That's how I see it. So I appreciate you so much, Alex, for allowing me to share. But there's a lot to life. And, I just appreciate you allowing me to get into this a little bit.
No, it's important. Everyone needs to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I sometimes wonder, I've heard a lot of stuff from people that supposedly love me saying, I don't want to hear your God stuff. I understand that. I don't want to beat somebody over the head with that stuff. But when I was ready, that's what I needed to do, and God was there for me, okay? But it is a big part of my life now, and that's why I feel so appreciative of being able to still continue on and do the Luminarios and still play with the Sidewinders and know that, we're human beings. There's more to life than just chasing a record deal. But maybe that's just part of experience in older age, too.
Yeah.
It's like when we're young, we're super ambitious, and I would stop at nothing to get what I wanted. I also am very grateful to have a store like this where I can have all sorts of people come in here and they can appreciate this. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you again, Rich, and appreciate your time and your perspective again. And to all the listeners out there, we'll see you next episode. And to wherever you are, I wish you happiness and good health.